There, it's
And
working.
if I'm not sitting properly for you,
You look great.
good.
Now, tell me who you are and where you served in the Peace Corps and when.
My name is Dan Huffman. I served in Nigeria, and I think it was Nigeria 25. I'm not certain about
Okay.
that. From 1966 through 1969.
Okay. From there, I would like to go back and have you give me your background. Your parents, who were they? Where'd you grow up? That kind of information. Your siblings?
My parents are J.D. Huffman and Edith Evelyn Eccles Huffman. And I grew up basically, I was born in Texas. We moved to Oklahoma when I was 6 years old, 7 years old, and grew up right here.
Where?
Right, in Oklahoma City.
In Oklahoma City?
Right.
Okay.
In fact, this area where we live right now, I used to hunt quail here
Wow.
when I was a teenager.
Huh.
And this was just all open fields at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up right here.
What did your parents do?
Both were teachers. My mother didn't start teaching until late in life. My father was a teacher almost from the time he got back from World War II.
Uh-huh.
He taught electricians in Texas for the rural electrification program.
Uh-huh.
And
Boy.
at that time, I had spent quite a bit of time living with or staying with my grandmother in Central Texas. We had no electricity, nothing like that. So they were just beginning that. My father started teaching there, and then when they moved to Oklahoma City, he went to work for the Oklahoma City public school system and taught at Central High School, which was downtown.
Downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And he was in the school system until he retired.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was he happy being a teacher?
he loved it.
Loved it.
Absolutely loved it.
What about your mother?
She loved it too.
Oh, great.
She taught, they were both in vocational education. My father taught electricity, and
Mm-hmm.
my mother taught cosmetology, hair kinking
Yeah.
and unkinking. And they both loved teaching.
Now, what about your siblings? You have
I
any?
have an older brother. He's the eldest in the family. He lives in Atlanta. And I have an older sister who lives here in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And there are three of us, and that was it.
Now, when you were growing up, did you have any aspirations for what you'd like to be, a ball player or whatever?
Yes. I initially thought I wanted to be a doctor. But I can't stand the sight of blood. So
Is that right?
yeah, I just
You must have found that out pretty early,
I
right?
did.
Yeah.
I did. A neighbor girl whose mother did not drive was jumping on a bed. This girl had platinum blonde hair, long, was jumping on a bed, fell, hit her head, split the back of her head open, and her hair was absolutely crimson. The mother didn't have a car and didn't drive anyway. And I was only 15, didn't have a driver's license, but I had to take her to the hospital. And that ended my desire to be a doctor.
Real life medicine
Yes,
was too
yes.
much, huh?
Yeah, this is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I don't know that I wanted to be an architect. I went to OU in the School of Architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And
When was this?
1963
Okay.
is when I started. And the School of Architecture at that time was under the School of Engineering.
Yeah.
And it was an abysmal mess the way it was organized. And all of our classes were in the stadium.
In the stadium?
Yes.
You mean underneath the stadium?
Yes.
Oh my God.
No air conditioning, no heating in the winter.
Terrible.
We had to supply everything, and it was very expensive and uncomfortable. The staff were terrible. And
Sound like they weren't serious at all.
no, the School of Architecture had a very good reputation. They had had some very well-known leaders, Bruce Goff being one of them.
Yeah.
But they didn't get very much funding from the School of Engineering.
Really
It
not.
overpowered them.
Mm.
And the people that they had running the program were terrible at it. And
So you wanted out pretty soon, right?
it took me a while. I loved the process of design and all of that. But the prospects for the future were not as bright as I thought they would be. And then,
How'd you know that?
well, from talking to people who were active in the business,
Yeah.
that you could spend the first number of years of your career as an architect doing toilet details or something fun like that, and which I didn't think was that bad, but I didn't want a long career of that.
Yeah.
And getting down to the actual design of a building might take years and years and years to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to work in Arkansas as an intern in a small architectural firm in Jonesboro, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the toilet details became very apparent.
Mm.
You weren't going to get to do much of anything of any interest.
Uh-huh.
And one day I had applied at OU to go into Peace Corps after I had graduated.
When did you graduate?
I didn't graduate.
Okay.
And this would have been, I was, I guess, considered then a sophomore in university. And the phone rang at the office one day, and secretary said, "Dan, this is someone from Peace Corps."
Now you had contacted Peace Corps first, right?
Yes, I had applied for training, but I asked to be considered for Peace Corps training after I graduated. from
Okay, at this
university.
point, let me ask you how this interest in Peace Corps even came up.
I liked the idea of it. I had heard
You'd
about
heard of it.
Peace Corps through university,
Yeah.
and
And this is like 1963, 64?
65-ish.
65, okay.
Yes.
All right.
And I like the idea of it. I've always thought that contact between very different people is important. I always thought that if you had something to offer to someone else, you should at least try. And I thought the idea was magnificent.
Did you like the idea of 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that didn't bother me at all, nor was I consumed by living in a different culture. That didn't frighten me at all.
Did it appeal to you?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Even though you didn't know what that
Right, I
culture
had no
was.
idea.
No idea.
What it
Yes.
was. The idea of being a tourist has never been that interesting, not uninteresting,
Yeah.
but I thought it would be a much greater learning experience to actually live in that culture and learn basically how other people live.
Now, were there any people, family members, friends, acquaintances that were feeding you this
No.
Peace Corps idea? Nobody. Nobody was talking about it.
No.
Okay. This was just
And-
your idea.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and was it, once I made the decision to do it, was it encouraged by family and friends? No, absolutely not.
Was
You're
it
crazy.
discouraged? Was it discouraged? The idea of joining Peace Corps? Did your family say, "Oh no,
Yes.
you don't want to do that"?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it was discouraged.
Did they tell you why?
It was just stupid idea to do. You don't leave here. And
Yeah.
but the lady on the phone said, you've been accepted for a training program in Nigeria, and the training would start, I think, early November, October, end of October, something like that.
Of 65.
Yes, in California. And, or maybe it was 66. Yeah, probably 66.
Okay.
I'm not real good with years. There have been too many of them, I think. And anyway, she told me a little bit about it, and she said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, one, where's Nigeria?" And so she's, "Oh, it's in West Africa." Sure, this sounds magnificent.
Uh-huh.
I was fed up with my educational system anyway,
Yeah.
and didn't have anything else going on at that time. And a change seemed important to me. So
What
I thought,
impact did that phone call or that contact with you telling you that you were approved and you could go to California and train? What impact did that have on you? Did you think, well, that's nice, or did you think, God, I can't believe it?
it was sort of a combination of, oh, that's nice, and I can't believe it at the same time. Good luck did not seem to follow me much in my life. And I've really viewed it as quite an opportunity. And I had no idea whatsoever what I was getting into.
Right, right.
Nor did I ever consider that it was going to be an absolute pivotal change in my life.
Now, you told your friends about this, didn't you? And what did they say?
They all said I was crazy.
Every one of them?
Every one of them. I called my parents from Arkansas and told them about it. And my dad said, "Well, I think you're nuts for doing it." And he said, "You haven't finished your education and both my parents being teachers, education was very important to
Yep.
them. My brother was a university graduate, and I should have followed in his footsteps. And I said, well, Dad, I'm actually sort of asking your advice. And he said, well, I know you, and you're going to do whatever you want to do anyway, so you don't need my advice. My advice is do what you want to do.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, are you supportive of it? No. Okay.
Okay.
My mother was not as adamant against it. Was she for it? No. And I think part of that was she didn't want me to be gone for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I took my father's advice, which was probably the first time in my life I'd ever done it. And
So you went out to California.
went to California,
And where in California?
San Diego.
San Diego.
University of California, San Diego campus.
And did they tell you what you were going to be doing?
Yes.
I mean, before you got there.
Yes.
Yeah.
They said that I was assigned to a survey group,
What's that mean?
land surveying,
Oh.
physical surveying. There were only 6 volunteers in that group.
Wow, that's the smallest I've ever heard of.
This was part of an agricultural and rural development training program,
Uh-huh.
and was, I believe, the first non-teaching program to go to Nigeria. And
So you were there for your expertise?
which I had absolutely none. I had never surveyed a day in my life. Knew nothing about it.
Well, now that's pretty daunting, isn't it? You're going to do this in this foreign country, and oh, by the way, you don't know anything about it?
Right, right. Challenges for me have always been very important and interesting. And I just viewed it as a challenge. I mean,
Sure was.
I've always known I'm not dumb. I'm not the brightest candle on the cake, but if I apply myself, I can usually succeed at it. to
Okay, so
some
you had
degree.
confidence
I
in
had
yourself.
confidence in myself.
Okay, so you get to San Diego, and there are 5 others who are going to do the same thing as you. How long did you stay with that group in San Diego?
I think training was 3 months.
All of it in San Diego? With just these?
Well, they had a little program. We were sent to Mexico for, I don't know, 3 weeks, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
But we couldn't tell anyone we were with Peace Corps because there was no agreement between Mexico and the U.S. for Peace Corps to be there.
Oh, okay.
And it was another marvelous experience.
Where was it in Mexico?
South of Ensenada in Baja is where I was.
Yeah.
And there were other volunteers in lots of other places, but
But you were on your own
the
in training?
The 6 of us all went to
Oh.
the same place.
Okay, okay.
And our training, to back up just a little bit, our training, we were very separate from the rest of the training group. I think there were about 125 trainees.
And most of them were in education?
No, they were in rural development.
Okay. But you were a segment of rural development
Right.
surveying.
Right.
Okay.
And we were quite separate from the rest of the training group, and weren't subjected to the same training format or program.
Yeah.
And our trainer, a man named Dick Campbell, was quite adept at doing the job. He knew a lot about survey. And I think there was one person in our group who had been in forestry. Excuse me. Had been in forestry. He knew something about survey, and a very nice fellow. I still communicate with him on a fairly regular basis. He and I were partners once we were in Nigeria. But we went to Mexico, and part of what I did, and I was separated from the rest of the group, part of what I did was train students with the Marine Sciences Institute of Ensenada, train them survey methods.
Is that your assignment now you're talking about?
Yes.
Not training.
Well, it was in training.
It was in, you were training others while you were in training.
Yes, yes, yes. Not a bright idea,
No,
but
not at all.
it was what the training I was doing was very basic. And we were assigned to work at a limestone quarry company, and they wanted to build a new road. This quarry was right on the Pacific coast, and they wanted to build a new road to a small town, Santo Tomas, about 20 miles long, and they needed to transfer elevation information from a survey beacon on top of a large hill down to the valley floor where this new road was to be. And I was basically training these 5 students in leveling how to do that. And we transferred the elevation information from the top of this large hill down to the valley floor. And they were all very good students, very nice people. And I had a little cabin, well, wasn't a cabin, it was a shack, that sat right on the cliffs of the Pacific. If you took 4 steps out the front door of this, you dropped 80, 90 feet to the beach. So it was important to not take more than about 3 steps. And I lived there alone for the 3 weeks.
How'd you eat?
The limestone quarry company had a camp for their own workers. I was not allowed to live in the camp because I was a gringo. And I thought that was a little ironic, but it was like throwing Brer Rabbit into the briar patch for me. I loved it. And the limestone quarry company brought food. I had to prepare it myself, which was fine. I was adept at doing that. And I would get basically weekly deliveries of food. After a few days there, they finally said, well, if you wanted to, you could eat breakfast in the company mess hall.
I guess you passed somehow.
No, it was delicious. Absolutely delicious. They also had 6 billiard tables.
Hmm.
And as the days evolved, then I was told that I could come there in the evenings if I wanted to, and maybe learn how to shoot billiards, which I knew nothing about. And I did. I was never good at it, but it was fun.
Well, let me ask you this. You're learning about surveying, and you're even demonstrating your ability in training. But what are you learning about Nigeria?
Nothing.
Okay. Nothing. Did that bother you at all?
No.
I'm not serving in Peace Corps in Mexico. I'm serving.
Peace Corps training, and I have to say that Peace Corps as an organization, I was never impressed with. In training, especially,
Mm-hmm.
or in Nigeria. I, in my own opinion, thought they were very inept at both tasks.
Do you think, just giving them the benefit of the doubt for a minute, do you think it was because Peace Corps was still new and finding its way?
Yes. I think in Nigeria, once I got to Nigeria, there were 1,000 volunteers in Nigeria alone.
Wow, quite a lot.
And most, well, predominantly teachers.
Uh-huh.
And I think Peace Corps was trying to really figure out how to do all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And during my 3 years in Peace Corps, they didn't figure out much about it. They didn't make a lot of progress at that.
Didn't they want input from you and the other PCVs? And first of all, that question, and second, did you give them any input whether they wanted it or not?
My nature is to do that. And did they really want it? No, they didn't. Peace Corps management in Nigeria, for the most part, they considered themselves to be rather elite people.
Really?
And, oh yeah, and they didn't really have a hell of a lot to do with volunteers unless they could meddle in your life. And
Yeah, I know that.
the predominant thinking was that as a volunteer, you should be suffering. Well,
Do you really mean that?
oh yes, assuredly I mean it. I experienced it numerous times. As a little forward, as a surveyor, the organization I was assigned to, Northern Nigeria Survey, was a magnificent organization, marvelously run. They had a recognized performance worldwide in the areas of mapping, cartography, printing, everything. And I was very fortunate in that.
Because Peace Corps had a contract with this company?
It was a government
government
organization.
Oh, okay.
And what Peace Corps had with them, I don't know. Obviously, they did have some sort of arrangement in that they would supply them with 6 Peace Corps volunteers. And a couple of times, well, first of all, our company survey division offered us a small apartment-sized kerosene refrigerator. Peace Corps said we couldn't have it
Why?
because we're supposed to suffer.
They wouldn't tell you that.
No, they didn't tell you
what
that.
was their? I mean, I would have asked. I would have said, "Hey, I need this."
Well, exactly. The need denying the refrigerator was stupid, and that's the only way. Teachers all over Nigeria lived in government bungalows and had a full-size refrigerator, every one of them. Not a single one didn't.
Wow.
But the six of us, we lived in a tent, or tents.
Do you think that this came from the top, whoever your Peace Corps director was?
I don't know where it came from. It came from an ignorant person.
Yeah,
Or an ignorant group of people. And I was later on given the job of town planning officer for a brand new state in Nigeria.
brand new state.
Yes. Northern Nigeria used to be a huge region, and they had a civil war, and after the Civil War they broke northern Nigeria up into 6 different states. Of course, each state wanted the full complement of government officials, and I was given the job of town planning officer for the most populous state.
Town planning.
Yes, city planning.
City planning.
And Peace
Gosh.
Corps said I couldn't take it. That it was an administrative position where I made decisions. And the ministry for whom I was assigned told Peace Corps to go away. And they said, we'll do whatever we need to do. And it's basically none of your business. If you won't let him take this job, he can just quit Peace Corps and go to work for us.
Okay.
And then it was the best thing since sliced bread to Peace Corps. Then they sent someone from Washington to write a story about this. Peace Corps used to have a magazine back then.
You mean in Nigeria?
No.
Generally.
Peace Corps, yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of it and don't know that I ever saw it. But then they thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And I think that record still stands. I'm not certain of it, that I had the highest administrative position of any Peace Corps volunteer up till that time, and I think that still stands. I'm not certain about it.
Yeah.
And don't care.
Might be, yeah. But what about you made this government agency want to go to bat for you like that?
I don't really know.
Because it sounds like you're really interested, but you're also quite new at all of this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Part of it was necessity on their part. Each of these 6 new states wanted to have their own complement of government officials. And that was not easy. And
Finding them?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they had all been lumped in one group for this huge region, and then all of a sudden you have to have 6 of everything for each of the 6 new states. Part of it was necessity or desire, maybe, on their part. they wanted every position to be filled. And
Well, and they didn't have a lot of candidates.
right,
I take it. Okay.
right.
Huh.
I
What-
progressed,
And you were going to be town planner?
yes.
I'm not even sure I understand what that has to do with surveying.
Little to nothing. Part of it was the system in Nigeria, at least in northern Nigeria, of land ownership. Land could not be owned by anyone other than the government.
No private ownership at all.
No private ownership
Okay.
of land, period. People were given what they called rights of occupancy for 99 years for whatever use the land was intended for. Approval of those rights of occupancy had to go through someone. And that went through my office as town planning officer.
So the Nigerians would come to you and they would ask your permission?
Yes,
This American?
yes.
Did that strike you as really odd?
No.
No. Why not?
Um,
I mean, to me, it seems like hubris. You know, like, here I am and you come to me when you need something.
They didn't come directly to me. They applied for land through the Ministry of Works and Survey. And I don't know what those two things have to do with each other. And then the application they had made came to me to review as far as planning purposes. Obviously, you don't want a factory right next to a residential area.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Okay.
The city, capital of this state, was the most populous city in northern Nigeria. It was Kano, Nigeria. And at the time, the estimated population was about 500,000 to 600,000. It is now
Wow.
5 to 7.5 million.
Ah, man.
And anyway, the planning inside that metropolitan area was much more difficult than the rest of the entire state because it was very rural. And so these applications would come to me and I would check, you know, to see what they were next to and did it interfere with anything. Was it ecologically sound? Yada, yada, yada.
What about city services? Would they have to come to you for your permission to set up the distribution of water?
No.
No. You didn't deal with them.
I did because it was within the same ministry that I worked for. The utilities were minimal, even in this city of 500,000 to 600,000 people.
No running water?
There was minimal running water.
Some people got it, but most didn't.
The people that got it were the government officials.
Ooh.
And I lived in the government residential area once I became a government officer. And we had electricity electricity, we had running water,
Mm-hmm.
and
Sanitary toilets,
yes, yes,
Mhm.
toilets,
Okay.
indoors, and all of
showers.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
A very nice. We thought it was very nice. I guess
Well, it was.
most Americans would not consider it
Yeah.
very nice. Um, I had lived in a tent for a year and a half to 2 years. Not a little bitty pup tent, but a huge big tent. And
Where were you living in a tent like that?
when I was out surveying, we,
Oh, before Peace Corps.
no, I had never surveyed before Peace Corps.
No, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Uh,
So before you got this job as a city planner, you were surveying.
Field survey.
So we haven't even gotten to that part yet, have
No.
we? No. Why don't we back up then, and you tell me about your assignment as it progressed.
Okay.
When you got to,
Once I got to Nigeria.
yeah,
Okay. The Northern Nigeria survey, to whom we were all 6 of us were assigned, sent us at first to right on the edge of the Sahara Desert, the northern border of Nigeria, between Nigeria and Niger. And we were involved in map completion. There were large areas of Nigeria that had never been mapped. The survey group had aerial surveys done, and the survey group was exceptionally adept at producing maps. And they would send us a map, very detailed as far as topographical features and roads and tracts and where villages were and other topographic features. And then we'd go out into the field and actually collect the names of the villages and the names of roads and all of this stuff and fill it in, send that back to the survey organization, and they would include all that information on a final draft of the map. And all of us were involved in that.
during this time when you're doing this survey work, were you attempting to learn another language?
Oh, yes. Yes.
What language, and what were the circumstances there?
In Peace Corps training in California, we had, I think, a couple of language trainers that were to teach us Hausa, H-A-U-S-A, which is the lingua franca, at least of northern Nigeria.
Okay. Most
And-
villages in northern Nigeria spoke this language?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And they attempted in training to teach Hausa.
Uh-huh. With mixed results, I guess, or poor results?
Poor results. When I got to Nigeria, I was totally inept.
Yeah.
I got up to right on the northern border of the country and had 135 laborers working for me all of a sudden. And I had one head man who had an English vocabulary that was passable. And everything else was done in Hausa, and I learned very quickly, you better learn this language. And there were no other Europeans anywhere near us.
Uh-huh.
And
So you're totally cut off that
yes,
way. Yeah.
yes. And so I started learning Hausa. Languages have always been interesting to me, and I've never had any real problems learning them.
And you didn't have any trouble learning this one?
No, no, plenty of people willing to
Yeah,
try
lots of
to.
tutors.
Yeah, and I had an old man in my first assignment area who was helping me, and I asked him when I would know I was fluent in the language, and he said, "Oh, very easy. When you start dreaming in that language, you know you're fluent." And
Had you achieved that?
at that point, no, I hadn't.
Yeah.
I did.
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
I have not had a dream in Hausa in years. But for a number of years I did,
Yeah.
and found it very pleasant.
So language was
Language was critical, especially in the very isolated places we were. Since these places had never been mapped, contact with Europeans was not common. And we would go out. In my case, I had a partner with whom I worked, another Peace Corps volunteer. We would go out and say go to a village, and oftentimes all the inhabitants would either hide or leave
Wow.
because they hadn't, and we rode motorcycles, and they hadn't seen a European in years and years and years, if ever.
And the whole village would just take
Oh,
off?
yeah, yeah.
Wow, that must have taken your breath away.
We finally figured out in every village there's a well. If
Yeah.
you just go sit by the well, people are eventually going to want some water. So they'd filter back in. And
Were you prepared for that? Did
No.
anybody tell you that
oh, hell no.
What did you think?
No one
the
in
first
Peace-
time you went to one
No
of
one in
these.
Peace Corps knew what we were going to be doing, nor do I believe they really cared.
So
I think they were more concerned with how many Peace Corps volunteers can we stuff in Nigeria.
well, if it had been me, I think I would have been thinking, what the hell did I do? I just drove up on my motor scooter and they all took off.
Yeah.
What's
Well,
going on?
at first it was sort of set both of us back. Well, you know, what the hell do we do now? And then we
Yeah.
decided, well, obviously someone is going to want water at some point. And sometimes it'd take an hour or two of just sitting there, and people would start to filter in. And
You have a talk with them?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And that's where the
Wow.
necessity for being able to speak the language really
Oh,
came home.
essential.
I couldn't drag an interpreter with me
Yeah.
on the back of a Honda 90, and so it was up to you to do,
And you did it.
and we did it.
So by that time, you could make yourself understood.
Yes,
Okay. Good thing.
maybe not extremely well.
Yeah. But
And
fundamentally.
maybe it took lots of drawing with a stick in the dirt
Yeah. Yeah. Some of that.
to get the idea across.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a will, there's a way. And
Wow, that's something.
I found it all rather interesting.
Well, let me ask you this. After this had happened once or twice, and you go to a new area, and you knew it was going to happen
Oh,
again,
yes.
what would you do? Was there anything you could do?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Pull up in the village and wait for someone to come to the well.
So it became a wishing well for you.
Yes, yes, very much, very much. But I found once people began to filter back to where you were, and you could maybe ineffectively communicate with them in their own language, there was immediate trust building from that.
Yeah.
And they thought, well, these people do not intend us any harm.
Right. Look at the trouble that this guy's gone to already to
Yeah.
learn the language.
Yeah. And I found it all rather interesting.
Sure. It's extremely interesting.
And we got to see areas of Nigeria that many people never got to see, and I might add, would probably not want to see.
Not want to, right.
And
And you're living in a tent.
yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, we moved on the average of once a week. And we had a 3-ton truck that was available to our entire group.
Mm-hmm.
My partner and I were in charge of all the 135 laborers, which were all of them necessary? No, but it was great for employment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And the company provided the food for this traveling caravan of workers.
no,
Well, how'd you eat?
we had a cook, and a lot of people think that's excessive, but buying groceries and cooking was a full-time job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If
Sure.
I had to have done that myself, I could not have worked.
Yeah.
And so we had a cook, and just day-to-day housekeeping was not easy. If you wash your clothes and lay them out to dry, there were flies that laid eggs in them that would eventually bore into your skin. And so everything that was washed and dried had to be ironed.
Mm.
We're living in a tent. We don't have electricity. The iron was a charcoal
Oh,
iron.
yeah. I've seen them. Yeah.
And someone had to do that. Well, I didn't have time to do it if I worked. So we co-opted laborers to help the cook, and someone had to carry water. You're right on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and there ain't piles of wood everywhere. Somebody has to collect firewood. Somebody has to carry water. It's from a well somewhere. Someone had to dig our toilet every time we moved once a week.
Yeah.
And so it took quite a few people to do this. And
Beyond the 135 that you brought with you. Is that right?
no, we used them for all
Oh,
of this.
okay.
And
Okay. You weren't recruiting others
No,
from the area. Okay.
we paid these people through our survey group, and they were responsible for feeding themselves and finding a place to live.
As you moved about.
Right,
Okay.
right. And the purpose, the stated purpose for that many people was if you had to move your camp and there were not any roads to do it, everything had to be carried in head loads. And we did that on a number of occasions. Most of the time there was a road or a track that you could manage.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there wasn't. A laborer was allowed to carry a maximum of 60 pounds. And
By the company.
yes, by Nigerian rules.
Yeah.
And to move everything that we had could easily take 100 people. And
Wow.
the tents were not small. I think it took 18 people just to carry the tent.
Gosh.
And the poles and the ropes and the stakes and everything that goes. It wasn't a small tent.
Yeah.
And so it could easily take up to 100 people if you had to move without the aid of a truck. And so that was another one of the reasons for having that many people.
Well, another thing that I'm wondering about is you say it's on the edge of the Sahara, and when I think of the Sahara, I think hot.
Oh,
So what's the weather like?
9 months out of the year, there's not a drop of rain. And it is hot. Winter, it is not so much the actual temperature that becomes difficult. It's the temperature difference from day to night that becomes difficult. Anytime that is separated by 50 degrees,
Oh, yeah.
night becomes really cold.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we always had, and I don't care what the weather was like, we always had a fire at night where everybody would gather around. And we had kerosene lamps and lanterns that we used inside the tent. Well, they produced quite a bit of heat.
Yeah.
And so we had some warmth. Once you went outside, it was cold in the winter. But for 9 months out of the year, not a single drop of rain, humidity virtually not measurable. And then for 3 months, it rains every day.
Every day. Wow, a lot?
Yes, you could, the first rain of the year, if it happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you could pretty well gauge that the next day's rain would also come around 4 o'clock, maybe not right on the button. And they could be just virtual downpours.
Yeah.
The storms there were huge and violent.
Yeah. So how long were you moving about like this, doing this job?
We did map completion for about 6 or 8 months. And then the Northern Nigeria Survey asked my partner and I to transition from map completion into physical surveying. And it became more interesting.
Physical survey where?
Property surveys, surveys for missionary groups,
Just whatever they needed done.
yeah, whatever was there.
Yeah. Because you're really working for them. You're not working for Peace Corps.
No,
Yeah.
no. I had no contact with Peace Corps.
At all.
No, no. We would,
For how long did you have no contact with Peace Corps, would you say? As far as you can remember.
at least a year and a half.
Wow. You are unique, Dan. I mean, I've never interviewed anybody with a story like this. Most volunteers that I've talked to couldn't stand the way the Peace Corps was always looking at them and telling them what to do and what not to do. And
One of the most intrusive organizations I've ever been around is Peace Corps. And I can only speak about Nigeria. I cannot speak about anywhere else.
yeah.
And I don't think most of them had enough to do. So they hunted things, and interfering with your life seemed to be one of the most fun jobs they had. And I avoided them, quite honestly.
Because Because you had a meaningful job that you were
Yes.
doing.
And rather structured.
Yeah.
My partner and I, who lives in Salt Lake City, a marvelous human being.
Who is your partner?
Ron Daniels.
Okay.
I love the man.
He's Peace Corps volunteer too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He was the one who actually, the only one of us who actually had any survey experience. And once we started surveying, we'd go into the headquarters of the survey group, and Ron and I would select all of the outstanding surveys that were the farthest away, the most difficult to get to, the most rural, and the most difficult surveys, which survey group loved that we were willing to do that, because all of the other senior surveyors, who were virtually all British, wanted the easier things to do that you didn't have to go very far to do.
Were there any Nigerians in senior positions?
No.
No. So here's a Nigerian governmental agency that is employing,
Expats.
yeah.
Yes.
Would employing be the right word? They weren't paying you, were they?
No, they weren't paying us.
Yeah.
They did pay the other surveyors. There was one senior surveyor, not an administrator, but a field person, who was Nigerian. Unfortunately for him, he was from the eastern region of Nigeria, which became the breakaway state of Biafra, over which there was a civil war which went on virtually the entire time I was there. And once war broke out, he had to be repatriated back to the east.
Did you ever go over there?
No,
No.
no,
Good.
no, it was not possible.
It's very, very dangerous too.
Oh, very.
Yeah, yeah.
Very dangerous. Where we were, up in the farther regions of the north, we were reasonably unaffected by the Civil War. I never found myself worrying about my safety, and maybe that was due to ignorance, but there you go.
But Peace Corps wasn't worried about you either. I mean, they weren't sending somebody out tracking you down saying, "Hey, this is getting dangerous."
No.
No. Okay.
Once the war started, as an example of that, they decided they were going to have to evacuate Peace Corps from the eastern region.
Yeah.
And they tried to do it in boats along rivers and get them down to a port, and then transport them in ships from there to the capital, Lagos, and then fly them out. Totally unsuccessful, and a lot of the boats they were in were fired upon by rebel groups or army groups from the other side.
Were any of them killed?
I don't think there were any killed. There were a few injuries. Anti-American feeling in the country as a whole was high, very high.
Very high?
Yes.
Why was that?
Stupidity again. Nigeria, once the war broke out, Nigeria went through diplomatic channels to secretly ask the U.S. to help them, assist them in this war. The United States, in their infinite wisdom, publicly, not through diplomatic channels, but publicly said no. And of course, no one even knew that Nigeria had asked for the help until the U.S. denied it. And
Well, of course, at this period, the U.S. was giving all of its help and aid to Vietnam.
yes,
So it wasn't going to give any help and aid to Nigeria, would it? I mean, wouldn't that be the reason for turning it down?
probably one of the
This is
main
LBJ we're
reasons.
talking about.
Yeah, and the eastern region of Nigeria was oil rich.
Oh, well, we're interested in
It
that.
was running out of the seams, and Mobil Oil was very present there.
Yeah,
The Midwestern region, which was just to the west of the eastern region, also had oil. They had not found any in northern Nigeria. But that was one of the main reasons that anti-Americanism was rife.
okay.
And you have to understand Nigerians. Rumor spreads like wildfire.
They like a good rumor?
Oh, yes, yes. And they tend to panic over even small instances. So much of Nigeria is rural. There weren't
Sure.
big cities, there were a few, but very few. And
And you were working in those rural areas
Rural.
for a year and a half
yes, yes,
in your tent
yes,
with your workers.
yes.
Boy, what a scene.
Oh, it was marvelous.
Yeah. And why did it end at a year and a half? What happened?
After a year and a half, this was when all of the new 6 states were coming into being. After a year and a half, survey groups split my partner and I up. And there was more work than there were people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was named town planning officer for Kano State. My partner stayed with our original organization, who they changed its name to Common Services. It had been the regional headquarters, but now it was trying to help all of these separate states. He stayed with them and continued to do actual survey
Yeah.
work. And I was assigned to this job in Kano,
As a
And-
city planner.
yeah, and in an office, which was absolutely new to me. From living in a tent to having a house that actually had floor and a roof.
Wow. When was this? I'm interested.
68.
What month? Do you have any remembrance of that? When you made this dramatic change in your life?
I would say we got to Nigeria in December, first part of December, so slided a little bit. Everything happened on an annual basis for me as far as Peace Corps service. So I would say it was about mid-year of 1968 that I was assigned this town planning job.
Okay.
As part of that, I was on the executive council of the governor, who was a military governor, and one of the biggest crooks known to man.
Did you know that when you took the job?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Why'd you want to work for a big crook?
because I didn't have any choice. I mean, I could have left, but
You mean come home, come back to the U.S.?
yes.
Yeah. But so you had no other option. You couldn't have just taken another job in Nigeria.
No,
Okay. All right.
no. I was on the executive council for the governor, and at the same time was named as planning advisor to the local government. In Nigeria, you have basically the federal system of government,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had traditional government. Kano was an emirate, and there was an emir of Kano. He was the head of local government.
What's emirate?
The emir was the leader, was a political and religious leader. Northern Nigeria was virtually entirely Islamic.
Okay.
And there were numerous emirates. Kano was one of the largest and most prestigious. And it was sort of funny when I was named advisor to the Emir's council. I went to the first meeting, and no one from state government went with me. And I was introduced by the fellow who started the meeting. I don't remember who he was or what his title was. And the meeting was all in the local language, Hausa. And no one really knew that by that time I was fluent.
Yeah.
And he stood up and he said, well, the government is forcing another one of their little white men on us to try to dictate to us what to do. And so I'm going to introduce this little white man to you. And I thought, well, at least there will be a little humor involved in this.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he introduced me, and I stood up and immediately started speaking in Hausa. And the audience is sitting there with their mouths wide open.
Yeah.
And they, oh, he understood everything this guy said about it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, this is one little white man who is not here to dictate to you.
Uh-huh.
This is a little white man who is here to listen to you and to find ways between the local government and the state government that we can cooperate to help everyone.
Terrific.
And that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to excuse my Hausa because it is spoken Hausa of the rural areas. It is not formal Hausa at all.
Uh-huh.
But I do understand most of it. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you.
Hmm.
And I hope you will accept my efforts as some indication that I'm interested in doing this.
Did they give you some applause at this
Yes,
point?
they did.
Oh, great. Great.
It was marvelous.
That must have been one of the highlights of your
Oh,
life.
it was. It
Yeah.
was. And I met lots of people, some who I was intimately acquainted with during my entire time in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, Janet, came to Nigeria and we got married there.
Oh,
One of them was one of our wedding guests, I say.
uh-huh.
It was required that we have at least three people witness our wedding, and he was one of them. And it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity.
Did you have that job for the other year and a half that you were there?
Yes.
Okay, so you had 2 jobs that were a year and a half each. Now, at the end of your, getting close to the end of your second year, it was necessary for any PCV to ask for an extension. Did you have to do that?
I didn't ask. The ministry for whom I worked asked for an extension. And I think it was probably the first time in my entire experience in Nigeria that the Peace Corps agreed to do something.
For you,
Yes.
rather than to you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think part of it was, well, if we agree to this, maybe we won't have to hear from him anymore.
Yeah, yeah. He'll get off our backs.
There was a point of interest that has nothing to do with really Nigerians. During the Civil War, instead of the U.S. helping Nigeria, Russia, or Soviet Union at the time did. There was a large contingent at the Kano airport of Soviet planes, you name it. And there were a lot of non-military civilians who worked for the Soviet Air Force. One night in the Kano Club, actually it was one morning, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, there were a group of obviously Russian-speaking people sitting at a table. I was by myself and getting ready to finish a beer, and I raised my beer up. I knew how to make a toast in Russian, and that was about the extent of my Russian language capabilities. But I toasted them, and it was immediate. Oh, come sit with us, come sit with us. They were strictly forbidden to have any association with foreigners, especially Americans. And we just became marvelous friends. And would surreptitiously meet. And this involved having a volleyball game of Peace Corps volunteers versus the Russian Air Force, Soviet Air Force.
Wow.
And volleyball was a national sport for Russians. And we knew we were going to get beaten. We didn't care because there was cold beer to drink during the process.
And camaraderie.
Yes, it was all just fun. I came home from work one day, and there were 5 men in suits sitting in my living room, and 2 Chevy Suburbans, black, parked outside. And I walked in, and I had always told my cook, don't let people in here if I'm not here.
Yeah.
And he said, sir, I told them not to come in, but they ignored me. And I said, who are you people? We're from the embassy.
Which embassy?
American.
Oh.
And I said, and what do you want with me? Well, we're here to bring you a message from the ambassador. And I said, and what's the message? You are to cancel this volleyball match.
Oh.
And I said, why? Well, we have reliable information, they said, that the Russians are going to stage an international incident with Peace Corps.
Wow.
And I said, You people don't have anything to do, is your whole problem. And I said, here's my take. Tell the ambassador I do not work for him, that I do not take advice from him.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your coming, and you can leave the same way you came.
Now, this is the American ambassador to Nigeria?
Yes.
Okay.
And after that, I got called to the consulate in what was then northern Nigeria. I don't know how many times. You're required to come to the consulate. And I would go, and it was, what do you talk about with these Russians? Well, things like past girlfriends, our families. We have mutually agreed to never discuss politics or religion. And it's just life.
Yeah.
That's what we talk about.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing surreptitious about it. I don't know anything about the plans that the Soviet Air Force has, and they have no idea what my plans are, except we're going to have a volleyball game.
Mm-hmm.
And Peace Corps volunteers are going to get stomped in the process, and we don't care.
Yeah.
And I had a long association with these Russians, and
What did they say when you had your say to them? What did they say?
the consulate,
Yeah.
number one, they didn't believe a word I was saying.
Did they order you at some point to cease and desist, or we're going to get you out of here?
No.
Anything like that?
They never threatened that.
Okay.
I became very close with these Russians. The fellow who was the colonel in charge of this whole Soviet contingent,
Uh-huh.
I had dinner with once a month in his room at the hotel, and with an interpreter. And he was a marvelous fellow to me. He did not want any of his people knowing that we were doing this because it was expressly forbidden.
So the Americans didn't like it, the Russians didn't like
No.
it, but you carried on anyway.
Oh yeah, because we were not doing anything wrong.
Uh-huh.
We were doing something right. I had never met a Russian in my damn life.
Right, right.
And they had never met an American.
Mm-hmm.
We all went to see a film in the Kano Club one night. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming.
Oh, yeah, I saw. That was a hilarious
It
movie.
It was.
Oh, I think that's perfect to
And,
go see that.
we were doing things right. And every one of them and me said, if you could get Brezhnev and Nixon
Uh-huh.
sitting at the same table, sharing a mug of Star beer, we could probably have an easier time together, just like we're doing. Toward the end of my second year, Peace Corps and the State Department sent a man from Washington to write a report on me,
For who?
the State Department.
What do they care? What?
Oh, I was associating with Russians.
Okay.
And the fellow who showed up was the former Peace Corps director of the North.
Wow.
the only one I ever had any time for at all.
Uh-huh.
He was just a marvelous man. He had been the budget director for Washington, D.C. school system. And he was just a marvelous man. His whole family were there, wife and kids, and they were just great people. Anyway, he shows up to write this report on me. And he said, I wish I could let you read this. He said, there is a file on you, State Department file. It is secret. I can't let you see it, but I wish I could. I read it on the way over here. And he said, it is the most hilarious thing I've ever read in my life. Yes, he said, it is so damn stupid. And I said, well, there's something I have to tell you, that tonight we're having a birthday party for one of the Russian engineers, and I have to go to it. I'm going to it, and so are you. So I went ahead of him. He was staying in my house. He was just getting settled in. I went ahead, and one of my buddies, Russian buddies, said, we may have to cancel this because the first secretary of the Soviet embassy is here. And I said, well, the former Peace Corps director is also here, which I didn't know. And I said, we'll seat them together. I think that's perfect, don't you? Yes. And we did. And they were both taken aback by it.
Yeah.
And I...
For a while?
Didn't take long. Star beer has a great effect. And I have a photograph of them standing next to the swimming pool with their arms around each other and a 22-ounce bottle of beer in the other hand.
There it is.
They're both singing songs in two different languages, and not the same song. And so we get back to my house, get up the next morning, and this fellow from Washington said, Huffman, if you ever tell anybody about this, I will kill you. And I said, so Ed, what kind of report are you going to write?
Good
and he
question.
said, well, I can't include everything, can I? No. And I'm not concerned with what you write.
Huh.
And
What a great story.
never heard another word about it. Now, I did continue to have contact with Ed, this fellow, for a few years. His wife had some serious health problems and died. And then he also died. Marvelous guy. Loved his wife, loved his kids. And was the only director that I ever met during my 3 years in Nigeria that was worth his salt. He'd go out to the field and actually visit with volunteers, which none of the others ever did.
Yes, which you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So probably Peace Corps' acceptance of my third year there was in part to maybe get me to shut the hell up and stay away from them. Even though the only reason I was there is because they made me go there.
Well, I mean, Dan, the easiest thing for them would
Send
have been
me
to
home.
say, yes, send you home.
Yeah.
This is a 2-year commitment. You fulfilled yours.
Right.
Now you're gone.
Now get out.
Yeah. So they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? In your opinion?
I don't think they wanted any increased animosity between the government agency for whom I worked
Oh, okay.
and them.
I think
Because
that's
they
probably
would
it.
have, they ministry for whom I worked would have thrown a wall, I'd fit with them.
Ah, okay. Well,
And-
that makes perfect
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So probably more politically involved than any concerns they had about me.
Yeah. As your time was drawing near its end, did you give any consideration to re-upping again?
I didn't know that that was,
Or did you give any consideration to just going to work for Kano?
during my last year there, I was instrumental in setting up a quasi-government organization to handle planning and development for the metropolitan Kano area.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Metropolitan Kano Planning and Development Board. And I had worked very hard on that and was very interested in it. And the board asked me to go to work for them. The chairman of the board was one of the Emir's counselors
Mm-hmm.
that I met when I first started with them, a marvelous old guy. And they asked me to go to work for them as the head engineer, which I gave it serious consideration and decided to do it. And the Nigerian government wouldn't let me be called engineer because I have no degree in anything. And so the board decided, well, we'll just change your title to senior technical officer.
Mm-hmm.
And will you accept that? Yeah, I don't care what you call me.
Whatever.
I know what my job is. And so I went to work for them. And did, after my third year was with Peace Corps was over, I came home briefly and then went back to Nigeria. Janet and I had been corresponding back and forth, and it was decided that she would come over there and see if she liked it or not. And she did, and immediately fell in love with it. And then we decided to get married. And,
When was this? When did all this happen?
1970.
The beginning?
End.
End of 1970.
Yeah, we were married in December of 1970.
Where did you get married?
We got we got married in the district office of Kano. That's part of the local government authority. The district officer was the equivalent to mayor.
Mm-hmm.
He was a friend of mine. He was Muslim. He had never conducted a non-Nigerian, non-Muslim wedding in his life. And but he agreed to do it.
Ah.
We were good friends. He was a
Very
very
neat.
nice fellow. And we had 3 obligatory witnesses. One was the chairman of the board of this new board that I was working for.
Yeah.
And the chief executive officer, both Nigerians, marvelous people. One was the surveyor general of Kano State, who I had worked for as town planning officer.
Yeah.
He was Polish and a World War II refugee to Britain, Stanislaus Klipetsky. And the other person who was there was the senior surveyor for the Ministry of Works and Survey,
Mm-hmm.
British man, and very small group of people for this ceremony,
Yeah.
which from start to finish was 10 minutes. And a clerk had to stand behind the mayor to show him what to read.
Oh.
And this office is just stacked up with dusty files. And,
Uh-huh. Not a very romantic setting.
no. And both Janet and I were ready for it to be over with anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
So how much longer did you all stay in Nigeria after that?
about another year and a half. Corruption all over Nigeria was rife.
And getting worse?
Yes,
Yeah.
prices had just skyrocketed due to the war.
Mm-hmm.
A measure
So
of
what war now?
Biafran civil war.
The one in the east?
Well, yeah, east and the north. A measure of rice called a mudu had been about 12 cents before the war. At this time, it was 12 times that much.
Oh, wow. And rice is a staple?
Right.
Yeah.
And corruption was just rife. The governor of the state had very openly told the chief executive officer of this new board that I was working for that he required 15% of every contract we wrote.
Oh, man.
And my boss, marvelous Nigerian, Balarabi Ismaila, he told him no. He said, I will not do it. This is for the people of Kano. And he was unceremoniously fired.
Yeah.
And they named a Indian man, a Sikh, as chief executive officer. This man had lived in Nigeria for 10 years as an expat officer.
Mm-hmm.
Could not speak a single word of Hausa. Did not like Nigerians at all. Couldn't stand them, didn't want to be around them. And he
My
was
God.
the new chairman of the board.
Oh,
And the day they named him chairman of the board, I resigned.
So there was-
Not chairman of the board, chief executive officer.
so there was nothing for you to do except leave at that point, right?
I could have stayed. I could not have worked for him, ever. It went against every moral fiber
So you
of
had
my
to,
being.
yeah, so you had to find a new job for a new company
Yeah.
or whatever, agency.
And that was probably not available. And the chairman of the board tried to keep me from doing it. And we sat for an hour while he cried.
Wow.
And he said, Dan, I just don't want you to leave. And I don't want to leave either, but I cannot be involved in this.
Yeah.
I had just finished a feasibility study on the redevelopment of the old Kano market that had been there in the same place since the year 900.
You mean a public market?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And we did a multidisciplinary study, and I mean, we studied everything about it. This was in combination with the University of Ibadan in Western Nigeria, and the Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research, and the Ahmadu Bello University in northern Nigeria. Their economics and architectural schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to stay and see that survey come to some kind of fruition. And I knew it wasn't going to happen, ever. And my boss, the chief executive officer, was a great proponent of it until he was unceremoniously fired.
Oh, well,
And yeah, and this fellow that they named as chief executive officer could have cared less. He didn't even like Nigerians. And
gosh,
so,
time to go.
yeah, one gets to the point you don't beat your head on a sharp corner anymore. And it was that point.
So when is this?
That would have been 1973, I suppose.
73.
Would be about when Janet and I left there.
So you got there in 66 and you're leaving in 73. Wow.
And it was painful, a painful
I'm sure.
leaving.
You had so many of your great years and so meaningful.
And so many friends.
Yeah.
Close friends. And not all Nigerians. I had
Yeah.
lots of British friends.
Russians.
Russians,
Yeah.
Polish, Yugoslavs, I don't know what
Wow.
all. I never tried to become a Nigerian because I couldn't. Many people did try, nor did I shy away from it.
Uh-huh.
Many did, Peace Corps volunteers even. And it was painful. I mean, I'd spent, 7 years there?
Yeah. A long time. Quite a commitment.
It was, but it was time to do something different.
So what did you have in mind at that point?
Nothing.
Just return to
I had
Oklahoma.
been so isolated from the U.S.
Yeah.
during that entire time. We returned to Oklahoma, and I got a phone call from a former architecture student friend of mine who offered me a job in Florida working for his architecture firm. And Janet and I collectively said, why not?
Yeah, Florida's nice.
Yeah, so we took off and worked for him for about a year and a half and got a phone call from the father of a former architecture buddy of mine. And he was in Tulsa and was the vice president of an international drilling company, Laughlin Brothers Company, 75-year-old company at that time, and offered me a job. I came to Tulsa, interviewed, we mutually agreed, since I had never seen a drilling rig or had any idea how you got oil out of the ground, and he didn't know anything about whether I could do it or not.
Uh-huh.
We would do a 90-day trial period. It worked.
It worked. Huh.
And that started my career in the oil field, which lasted through the time I was 72 years old.
Okay. So let me ask you about, usually at this point in the interview, I ask the volunteer, was your Peace Corps experience transformative? And everybody says yes, my gosh. But the difference here, I think, is that in the case of everybody else, Peace Corps was intrinsically involved in that experience, but not here.
They were involved in a negative sense because at one point, when my partner and I were doing field surveys and we lived in a tent, we were close to the capital of the North. And Peace Corps contacted me and they said, there's going to be a group of writers and photographers here, and they want to photograph your moving camp.
Oh, sure.
Because this is suffering. We can get good pictures of Peace Corps volunteers suffering in real life. And so we told them when we were going to move, and they showed up, I don't know, like 3 or 4 Chevy Suburbans full of lights and no generators, and we don't have electricity. So they said, well, whenever you're ready to start the moving process, we'll start filming.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do the moving ourselves. We had people, and those people were very proud of their job.
Yeah.
They weren't forced into it. They were employees. Anyway, my cook comes out and he says they're ready to move, and he sets 2 folding director's chairs in the shade of a tree and pops the lid on 2 bottles of Star beer, and we sat down, and I told the head man in charge, carry on.
Yeah.
And so they started moving, and one of the camera operators said, you're not helping them. But they don't want my help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not any good at this.
Yeah.
I do the surveying,
Mm-hmm.
which they can't do. They do this, which I'm not going to do,
Yeah.
because they like their job. They're proud of it. And, they were just, well, get up and act like you're helping. No.
Make something up.
Yeah, no. Film what's here. And I'm sorry it's not abject suffering. I'm sitting in the shade drinking a beer, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. Well, they weren't real pleased with that. They sent, after I finally accepted town planning officer job in Conroe, they sent 2 people from Washington to write a story about it. Because, oh, hell, this is great,
Yeah.
even though we told you not to do it.
Uh-huh.
And they did come. I never saw any results from it, and I doubt that there were any.
Probably not. Probably not.
But
You didn't live up to their expectation.
I wasn't suffering enough.
Well, that's it.
And I never did. No, Peace Corps was not formative on a positive note,
Yeah.
ever. In
Did
training,
give you the opportunity, however,
Yes.
without Peace Corps.
I could not have done it.
Yeah.
And I am forever grateful for that opportunity. Was it pivotal in my life? Absolutely, unequivocally. It changed everything I did from there on out.
Absolutely.
Have I been a stellar volunteer since then? No. I am, I guess, quite introverted.
You don't act introverted.
You don't make me act introverted. I don't go anywhere. I don't socialize. I have not followed the Peace Corps reunions. I dislike huge crowds of people, and I don't usually find it enjoyable.
Yeah.
So, have I been a volunteer since then? No. The jobs that I have taken consumed a lot of my time. the oil field fell apart in the U.S. And for years, if you could find a job, you couldn't make a living at it.
Yeah.
And so I worked overseas. Long absences from home. Was it what I would have chosen to do? No. Was it a way to maintain my family without there being hunger involved,
Yeah.
suffering? It was about the only way I could do it.
Okay.
Did I benefit from it dramatically? Did my family suffer from it? Probably. In my absence, has it worked out in the long run? Yes. I have very good relationships with our children.
Excellent.
Couldn't be better. My daughter went into Peace Corps, which you know. She...
Did you steer her that way? Did you?
No.
I wouldn't
Not
think so.
actively.
Not after what you've told me.
That was up to her.
But
I didn't steer my children toward religion. I said that was up to them. I would support them. I'm not religious. I would support them any way possible. But that needed to be a more adult decision that they made rather than one I made for them.
Yep.
I was brought up in a very religious environment. My mother and my grandmother both marvelous human beings. And it never satisfied a big need in my life.
Okay. I think that's where we're going to end this.